Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another Social Blueprint interview where we are highlighting people in a community who you may or may not know, but they all have an interesting story and a different vantage point. And as all of you know, since October 7th, we are certainly trying to highlight people that are tied to the Melbourne community, but also living and part of Israel. But before we get to today's interview, I just want to say here at the Social Blueprint, we are so much more than interviews. Events. We have the biggest events calendar in Melbourne. Organizations. Over 500 organizations are signed up with us. So any type of information, resources, aid that you need, it's all there. And all you need to do is to like, subscribe, sign up to our newsletter, and it's totally free. And now, with that, to today, Ittay Flescher, who some of you may or may not know from his Scopus days. But we really want to hear from Ittay because he has a very specific vantage point. He's sitting in Jerusalem right now, and he also has been there since October 7th and before that. And with that, Ittay, welcome.
Toda rabba, shukran. It's wonderful to be with the Social Blueprint and very much appreciate all the work you do to make Judaism vibrant and lively for our community.
Great. Hey, Ittay, making things lively, you are an educator first and foremost. Can you just talk to us a little bit about the work that you have done since you've made Aliyah?
Yeah, so before I moved to Jerusalem, I was a teacher at Adas, King David, Bialik, and Scopus for 15 years combined, teaching everything from Jewish studies, English, PE, Indigenous studies, Jewish studies, Israel studies, Shoah, Ivrit, so a whole range of different subjects, religion and society as well in VCE. And in 2018, I moved here because I felt like I needed, I had long service leave, and so it was an opportunity to spend a year here with my kids, and then we eventually liked it. There was also a little pandemic that you had in Australia, which I heard was very unpleasant, and so I was quite I was quite happy to avoid that by being. We had it here too, but it was a little bit shorter than your pandemic, and yeah, and so now I live on Emeka Fame in the German colony. For those that know Jerusalem, and I still work in education, primarily with an organization called Kids4Peace Jerusalem. Kids4Peace is an after-school youth movement, so think of it as being, I guess, similar to Habo or B'nai Kiva, but very different ideology. So kids come who are Jewish, Christian, and Muslim. All of our dialogue happens in Arabic and Hebrew. I speak Hebrew fluently, and I'm learning Arabic. And it's run by Israeli and Palestinian staff. And the point of Kids4Peace is to give kids an opportunity to get to know one another, to explore their religion, their culture, their national identity in an environment that fosters peace, justice, and equality. So that's what I do.
Right, incredible. And Ittay, I have to ask, obviously, I'd be so interested. You are dealing since October 7th across all the religions. Has or what has changed, or can you make even a blanket statement like that?
Probably an easier question would be what stayed the same, because there's
Okay.
a lot more that's changed than stayed the same. Look, I'm also a journalist for the Jewish Independent, so I'm constantly writing about what has changed and what has stayed the same. And in Jerusalem, we are a city that's probably the most diverse city in Palestine and Israel in terms of its population and the different, there's basically a large Haredi community here, a large secular or Zionist community, and then a large Palestinian community. And then we have to somehow find a way to share this city together. And what happened on October 7th, and since then the war in Gaza has been heartbreaking, I think, for everyone, for obviously very, very different reasons. I don't think there's anyone here that's not touched personally, whether you're a Jewish Israeli and you have a loved one who was kidnapped, or pretty much everyone has someone who is serving in Tzahal, or has been donating food to soldiers or the mefunim, the evacuees, and then most Palestinians have loved ones in Gaza or have been affected by lockdowns, restrictions on freedom of speech, closure of checkpoints, inability to move around the West Bank. So everyone in Jerusalem is affected by this war, and a lot of people obviously go inwards and go into their own communities. I know people have become a little bit more religious, going to synagogue a lot more. Muslims, it's the last day of Ramadan now, have been praying more, and there's a sense that you get a sense of comfort in faith
Right.
sometimes. So that's something else has happened, but there's just overall, a sense of life continuing as normal. Like, you walk down the streets and the cafes are still full, and people are still having weddings and birthdays and that sort of thing. But there is I guess, a heaviness in the air, knowing that any freedom that we may be enjoying now is not enjoyed definitely by people in Gaza or by Israelis that were directly affected by October 7th.
Right. For sure. And you obviously have a lot of interaction with the Palestinian community. Again, I don't think that we can necessarily apply a blanket statement, but have your conversations become more challenged, if you will?
Look, a lot of the Palestinians I speak to are people that I've spoken to for years before October 7th, and so that didn't change our relationships. I also think that we in Israel see very, very different news to what Palestinians see. So if you watch the mainstream Israeli TV channels, ערוץ 12, 13, 14, כאן, we don't see pictures of Gaza, we don't see interviews with Palestinians, we don't see the impact of closed checkpoints in East Jerusalem, we don't see images of starvation, stuff that I'm sure you see in the news in Australia. And then when Palestinians watch their news, they don't see the stuff that I see. They don't see the hostage family stories. They don't see the soldiers who are injured in Gaza. They don't see stories about the impact on Israel's economy. They don't see what happened to universities that didn't run for 3 months. So we sort of live in the same city, but we have our media gives us very, very different realities of the war. Now, everyone's obviously welcome to watch the media of the other side, but not a lot of people do. I do because I'm a journalist, but like a lot of people don't, because it's very challenging to their national narratives. And I think like my contact with Palestinians is a sense of we check in on each other. We ask how there's been festivals. They wish me a happy Purim. I wish them a happy Ramadan, and we try
Right.
and just be human beings to one another, which is like a really low bar at this time, but that's what we try and do.
Right. And media journalism, you are a journalist. Are there any key thematics that you're trying to write about right now?
Look, I think war can't happen with a lot of dehumanization. You can't do what you did on October 7th and do what's happening in Gaza without a great level of dehumanization. And I think for me, that's something that I find very confronting. And I think it's really important that people remember that people are not their governments, that Palestinians are not Hamas, that Jews are not all, Netanyahu, and that goes for Israel and also goes for around the world. And I think, a lot of what I try and do in my journalism is to say each person has their own views, and you should judge a person on the basis of their character, not on the basis of their nationality or what you think their nationality says that they believe. And by the way, the same goes for Haredim. There's an immense amount of hatred for Haredim at the moment in Israel because of the army draft issue, which is something that I find deeply troubling. That it's very common for people to say things like, oh, it's such a shame Haredim have so many children, or it's such a shame that Haredim get subsidized to learn Torah, as if somehow they don't have the same rights that every other Israeli citizen has to have children. And
Right.
so yeah, I'm against people dehumanizing people on any basis for having political views that they don't agree with. I speak every day to Haredim, to secular Jews, to Zionists, religious Zionist Jews, to Palestinians, and I try and understand that people hold the political views they have because of life experiences they have. So many Palestinians feel hostile to Israelis because they've experienced walls and checkpoints and permits and limitations on their freedom. So they feel hostile to Israel in the same way that many Israelis feel hostile to Palestinians because of terror attacks and rockets and all of these sorts of things. People don't just wake up hating someone. People
No,
go through life experiences, and when you do dialogue, you understand what those life experiences are, and then hopefully you work to mitigate them and change them so that they don't keep happening again.
right. Hey, I have to ask them to go deeper because it sounds like you
Yeah.
are really a communicator.
Mm.
How would you suggest we handle when somebody is confronting us? It doesn't matter where you are in the world, with a
Yeah.
viewpoint that is complete, that A, you completely disagree with, and B, they are being, in your opinion, quite hostile to you.
So the first thing, you can't engage with someone that doesn't want to engage with you. Um, that's a given, and generally on social media, that's the case. So most people that are going to be hostile to you don't really want to have a conversation. However, if the person who you're finding confronting is someone that you do have a relationship with already because you work with them or they're a member of your family or in your community or something
Right.
like that, then yeah, and I do this all the time. Invite them for a coffee, invite them for a meal, invite them for a walk around Caulfield Park, whatever it is you do, wherever you like to talk. And I always just start by listening, not listening to respond, but listening to understand. Like, you were very upset by something I said. You were very challenged by something I posted. Why? Tell
Right.
me why. Tell me. And then they'll say, oh, well, because it's wrong. Oh, why is it wrong? Where did you get your information from? Why do you think it's wrong? And then I'd say, well, I posted what I posted because I read this. What did you read? And then I would share beyond that. I also believe whatever I believe because I had this life experience. Can you tell me what life experience did you have that led to your belief? And then I would ask them, have you ever thought of what it would be like in my shoes? Because when I think what I would feel like if I was in your shoes, I would think this. And from there the conversation goes deeper. It's not a script, but
Right. Sure.
um but often I think the reason it's hard to talk to people that you disagree with is because, well, two things. One is we don't all have the same facts, but the other is, and I think we run the risk of, if you engage deeply with someone you disagree with, you might eventually change your mind. And people are terrified of changing their minds these days, and I change my mind a lot on a lot of things, and I have during this war as well. But I think that I think that is something that is really hard to do, and it's hard to do when you're under attack. I know anti-Semitism has gone through the roof
Right.
since October 7th, and I think that makes a lot of Jews very reluctant to engage in dialogue. In fact, the last column I wrote for the Jewish Independent was about a program called Building Bridges, which I used to coordinate in Melbourne, where we used to bring students from Jewish, Christian, and Muslim schools into each other's schools to visit synagogues and churches and mosques
Yes.
and to learn about how each other prays and their holy books and their festivals and their food and all of that. And that program's sadly not running for 2024. And and one of the things I wrote, in addition to being sad that it's not running, is that a lot of schools, I imagine, would have said, look, I don't want to put my kids in an environment where they're going to be challenged with things that we might consider anti-Semitic or Islamophobic or anti-Australian or whatever words you want to use for those
Sure.
statements. And then people say, well then let's not have that dialogue now because it's all too raw and it's all too hard, and a Muslim might say, I don't want to talk to a Zionist right now. And then I say, well, if that's your view, then the message you're sending to the kids is that we can't talk to people we disagree with. And I think that's a very challenging thing to say at a time when we see the consequences in Palestine and Israel of not talking to one another. So I think it's always important to keep lines of communication open and to have tough conversations, because that's how you grow as a human being. If you only talk to people you agree with, you don't grow, you don't develop. You just stay where you are.
Right. And as far as, and obviously you're a journalist, I'm asking this again in this way, social media, where the algorithms also, they tend to reinforce your existing beliefs as well. They show you
Yeah.
everything over and over again. Any thoughts about social media, and especially with teenagers?
I think, like, social media is like a blessing and a curse. Um, it's a blessing in that it can connect people from all over the world, and everyone knows, like on a birthday or an anniversary or
Right.
a special occasion or your kid's first day of school, whatever, there's something really beautiful about using social media to connect and share a special moment in your life, or a holiday, or a wedding, or whatever it is. And we never used to be able to do that. And I have so many friends in Australia that I feel like I'm kind of in their daily life. I know what they had for breakfast, even just for following them on Instagram. And I know how many weights they lifted
Yeah.
at the gym, even. Like, I know very bizarre details about people on the other side of the world because of things that they shared. But then I also don't know what's important in their life, because what you share is not always your real life. It's how you want people to see you. And then now, obviously, throughout the war, there's a lot of advocacy on social media, and a feeling that people need to present themselves in a certain way,
Right.
and then that creates flame wars, and it becomes very toxic, and then algorithms obviously feed the most toxic information gets shared more. And I'm often sad that, like, messages of peace organizations, groups like Women Wage Peace or Standing Together or the New Israel Fund, or groups that are trying to sort of bring people together, their content very rarely goes viral, because it's not pro-Israel, it's not pro-Palestine, it's like pro-peace, and there isn't a
Right.
lot of people sharing that content. But I think ultimately, yeah, for things to change, in addition to obviously needing political change and grassroots change, I think we need to use social media to advocate for what we want to see in the future, not just what is. So, for example, like, let's say there's a horrible anti-Semitic attack, or a
Right.
mosque is burnt, or something like that. That will go viral on social media. But if
Two
the next
seconds.
day, if the next day Jews are painting the mosque that was burned, or Muslims are fixing up a synagogue that was destroyed, or removing graffiti, or like those acts of brotherhood and solidarity that happen too, they don't go viral. And so I guess the question is, when you see something horrible, is your first instinct, oh, I want to put this on social media to show how the other side is terrible? Well, what does that do? Like, that
Right.
doesn't build peace. That just makes me hate the other side more. But so I always look for, and maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm delusional, because people tell me that all the time, but when I think of what I can share, I try and share stories of Israelis and Palestinians working together, of cooperation, of greetings for different festivals, of stories that show that another way is possible, because you can't have peace if you don't believe that you have a partner for peace. And so I know a lot of people today don't believe that there is any partner for peace on the Israeli side or the Palestinian side. And so I guess what I'm trying to do with my social media, and what I hope more people will do, is use social media to change that.
Right. And one of your comments is, despite everything and despite the rawness, you still feel that peace is possible. Are you a delusional optimist, or do you feel like that there's still, when you speak with people, at the end of the day, people want to have a roof over their heads, food on the table, take a holiday once a year, and live in dignity, I guess?
I think I'm an optimist because I'm a history teacher, and I know that all wars end. World War One ended, World War Two ended, apartheid in South Africa ended, the Rwandan genocide ended, the troubles in Northern Ireland ended. Wars, conflicts that killed millions of people, that destroyed entire countries. These things end one day, and this will end too one day. I mean, I want it to end now. I want the war to stop. I want the hostages to come home. I want to begin a political process now. But see, people are not ready for that yet. But I know that wars end, and they always do, because ultimately people want to live in peace and security and safety, and they just have to find out a way to do that. And when more people feel like they can do that through negotiation and through violence, that's going to happen. In 2009, it took a delegation of 12 children from Jerusalem to Belfast, a city that's had its own share of troubles and bombings and attacks.
Sure.
And we sat with politicians, Republicans, nationalists, unionists, who all had like different views on whether Northern Ireland should be, independent, whether it should be part of the UK, whether it should be part of the south of the Republic of Ireland, and since their peace agreement, they don't love each other. Let's not be naive about it, but they don't kill each other
Right.
like they did during the Troubles, because they've found a political process where they can resolve their differences. Even since the Tutsi genocide in Rwanda, there's Hutus and Tutsis that live next door to each other now in that country. And Rwanda's one of the sort of more prosperous African countries now because they had a reconciliation process that found a way for them to share their country in peace. I support a model here called the Land for All, 2 states, 1 homeland, as a vehicle for us. I won't go into the details of it now, but you should look up the Land for All if you want to see what I believe. But
Right.
I think that wars end, and if we believe that they won't end, then they continue. But as soon as we sort of draw a target that we want this to end, then you stop supporting violence. You stop supporting, I think what's happening in Gaza is unconscionable. It's not something I support. I think what happened on October 7th is obviously unconscionable. The rape of women, the destruction of so many kibbutzim and so many, innocent people killed at the Nova Party. And I just think, like, you don't do those things. Like, they're not things that should ever be done. And we need to find a way to lay our weapons down and to talk and to move towards a peaceful future together.
Right. I understand that. And speaking of peace together, is your view there are obviously very many different types of Jews within Israel. Since October 7th, what we're hearing are stories that people are tending to come together. Are you noticing that as well?
Yeah, look, I think you've got to remember before, I just want to take you back to October 6th. We
Yes.
were at each other's throats over the judicial reform. I know that seems like ancient history, but there was this, campaign to change the way judges were elected and the powers of the courts, and it was tearing the country apart like you couldn't imagine. Like, it was people who supported it were against it, just couldn't talk to each other. And I even remember on Yom Kippur in Kikar Dizengoff, a group put up a mechitza to pray, and then a secular group said, "How dare you put a mechitza in a secular space?" And they tore down a mechitza on Kol Nidre, on the holiest night of the year. We were fighting. And then a week later, that same Kikar Dizengoff was filled with religious, secular, right and left wing people, bringing thousands of boxes of goods for soldiers. And so, within a week, the country changed remarkably. And, there's a slogan of the war, B'yachad nenatzeach, together we will win, that you see on every, on cars, on buildings and schools. And there is a notion of unity that is quite amazing. I will say in the last month that has dissipated a lot,
Right.
because of the issue of the hostages. There are many people feeling now that Netanyahu has not done enough to release the hostages, that he hasn't been, flexible enough on the demands. People on the right are saying, well, Hamas's demands are ridiculous, so what do you expect? But the passion in these protests for the hostages released, which I go to a lot of them, is very real, and there's a lot of pain there. There's a lot of tears there. There's a lot of realization for some families, even their hostage families, and they know their loved ones are already dead, but they're still waiting for agreements to bring the bodies back for burial so they can mourn properly and have funerals. And yeah, there's an immense amount of division now around the hostage issue and the Prime Minister's handling of that, which kind of feels like we're back in October 6th in some way.
Interesting. And I suppose it's also more of getting on with life. In Israel, as you said, in Jerusalem, it does feel to you though like life is normal, but there's a heaviness in the air. Is that a way to sum it up?
Yeah, I think, look, again, West Jerusalem, very different from East Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Ramadan this year was very different. There was no decorations around Damascus Gate or Salahuddin Street. But yeah, look, I went to the Purim parade this year in Jerusalem. There were some people protesting, saying, why are you having a Purim parade? But other people were there with their kids and, with the giant dolls and all of that sort of thing. I think Yom Ha'atzmaut as well coming up will be a lot more muted. There'll probably be less fireworks and there won't be the F-15 flyovers. And I think the transition from Yom HaZikaron to Yom Ha'atzmaut will be very, very painful this year for many Israelis. Pesach next week, people are going to have starim and go to families and ask the 4 questions, and I think that
Right.
will happen. So yeah, I think there is a sense, at least for me in Jerusalem, that life for me goes on with a heaviness and an awareness that we have to be very grateful for every day that we have, and just seize every moment of life that we can.
Right. Hey, Itai, in closing, I just have one final question, which is if there was one point you'd like the diaspora Jewish community to know about life in Israel right now that may, in your opinion, be misunderstood, what would that be?
I mean, I think people misunderstand everything, but I think people look at the news and
Right,
like this morning, people in Jerusalem, they woke up, they brushed their teeth, they sat in a traffic jam, they got their kids to school, then they stayed in a cafe, they complained about the prices of food, then they watched some news about the war, then they maybe had an argument with someone, then they went home, then they made dinner, then they were a bit bored with their dinner, then they maybe watched a show on TV, then they spoke to someone who could be affected in the south. And all of those things happen to people every day because that's life. But when you watch
right,
the news, you just see one part of that. And the part that you see is obviously the violence, the war, the rockets, that sort of thing. And you sometimes forget that all of this other stuff happens as well. And I guess what I want people to know is that Israelis and Palestinians, yes, there is a war that's going on now, but I also want them to know that there are people in peace organizations that are trying to change that. That there are lots of people just living their lives unaware of the detail of the war that maybe you are aware of on the other side of the world, and
right,
that ultimately this place I know has become a symbol for a lot of people. It's a symbol for the West, for Islam, for all those sorts of things. But before it's a symbol, it's also a home. And I want people to remember that it's a home. It's a home for me, for my Haredi friends, for my Palestinian friends, for my religious Zionist friends. And just remember this place is a home. And if it's not a home for me, it's not going to be a home for any one of my friends. And the same goes in reverse. And that people, if they want to do anything to help us make sure that this place is better, then help us fight to make it a home for everyone.
great. Itai, thank you so much. We really appreciated it. And this has been incredibly interesting.
Bevakasha.
Thanks.